Okay, this KOINE broadcast, KOINE News. KOINE again is a reminder of the kind of New Testament that we have as believers. That's the one that was inspired, the kind that was inspired and provided for us. But this broadcast, I want to look at an article that was written and it was placed online, and it was called "What Calvinism and Arminianism Have in Common," and it's by Edward Fudge. I've not looked anyone up. I just printed this off to make it more convenient. But the last page says that this article was published in the April 27th, 1992 issue of Christianity Today. And then, of course, there's some details about how it was then placed into electronic format online, and by permission, of course. But there's some text in here, and I'm really curious about it because this article seems to hopes that people will consider maybe well, it says these 7 couplets come short, of course, of providing a third alternative to Arminianism and Calvinism. Now, I'm not going to say anything about a third alternative. I'll just write that down here for a moment. A third alternative. Because it's conceding that Calvinism, and if I misspell it, it won't matter, and Arminianism are alternatives. And of course, those of you who are critical thinkers, and all of us who have the mind of Christ, born from above, the mind of Christ, the heart of flesh, the Spirit of God, we have that. So we know the alternative to what? To what? Who wants an alternative anyway? But as we look at this, I'll go through these just because it primes a person to think and go along with that these are the only 2 things we would have. Alternatives to what? What about KOINE? Oh, well, that's too obvious. The KOINE text and the original meanings of words that are very, well, I'll just say it, they're very clear and common. How many people need to look at this word here, evangel, and say, well, what's that? Well, this is message. And this is the word some people translate good or excellent and or correct. Excellent, we have kalos for that. We have agathos for this. And then we have the little that. So this is difficult, isn't it? And that's real tough. Figure out what evangel is. What is baptize? That's a transliteral term. It's merge. That's the finite verb. Immerse is the past participial form of that, and it has someone added a prefix that's not in the KOINE text. But what's the mystery? What's the difficulty? What's the impossibility of KOINE? What makes such a small, such a concise, brief? And this is just a copy of a Textus Receptus, and you can see how small it is. What makes apostle so difficult? Apo, away from, sent or send. Where are we at? Where are we getting into things that we can't understand? So in this article, it had made an observation of a text that Jesus spoke, and it's called couplet number 3. It says, no man can come to Jesus unless the Father draws him or her. And it says, every person whom the Father has given to Jesus will come. And the idea conveyed here, there's an interesting phrase in here. It says, we may rejoice. That scripture here is splendidly illogical. Now, I don't know what that means. You'd have to ask Edward Fudge, and I'm certainly not taking him to task. I'm just asking us to look at what would KOINE say about John chapter 6, verse 44. And then let's see, because it should be interesting to see if there's some clarity in KOINE and what would the KOINE language say about it. So let's just look at John 6:44, and then let's look at it in light of let's not use any alternatives. Let's just take the original. So let's say KOINE and then talk about the original. And what we'll mean is if Calvinism and Arminianism, which that article in Christianity Today says they are alternatives, and that even in their 7 couplets of common ground that they were struggling to come together and to hopefully cause people to join or agree where they agree, and at least work together where they do agree and see how much they have in common. I think they have a lot in common. I think they're both equivalent in that they're both alternatives. Neither are original. They are something, some degree removed from the text. However many, it's not each aspect or element of each one that ever expanding. Whatever they are, they're always ever expanding. They assimilate more philosophies, or they refine their arguments. It just continues to expand. But whatever they are, they're not original. They're not the original. They're not according to KOINE, or we would all believe KOINE. If they were KOINE, then we wouldn't be calling them Calvinism, nor Arminianism, or Molinism, or it's endless number of isms. But let's just look at the text, since this is something that I know Baptists have certainly been struggling lately with Calvinism and Arminianism, a new surge of whatever. But really it's just, what's the text and what are we talking about? We know that the entire Gospel of John concludes with, these things were written in order that you might believe, and that believe that Jesus is the Christ, and that believing you might have life in His name. And so we know all the lessons in John's Gospel are written in order that someone might believe. So whatever these lessons say and teach, they aren't to negate faith or to prevent someone to come to that point of faith and to believe. They're just the opposite. So when someone says there's a difficult text in John's Gospel, what could be difficult about it by teaching it just the way it's written, and knowing that the purpose for it being written that in that manner, according to those words, in that context, according to that kind of action, knowing that the purpose for all the lessons in the Gospel of John are to bring a person to the point to believe, in order that you might believe. So let's remember this lesson first of all. The purpose of this lesson is in order that you might believe. And even in the King James Bible, it has this believe punctular action pointed out. So there's our purpose for this lesson. So he actually said, or common in the original, let's just try to word it out where it conveys according to KOINE, not where it competes according to other translations, not where it competes with literary style and mastery. Let's just see how we can word this out according to the common text. Not even one man, excuse me, is able to come. Oh, am I missing? Make sure I don't miss out here. Keep us on page here. To come toward me, and this is Jesus speaking, of course. If, and he literally says, referring to, let me make sure I turn there so I don't misquote this. It's not a good time to misquote when you're trying to demonstrate the clarity of KOINE. So let's make sure we get it right so we don't have to go through all that. Okay, here we go. Nope, went too far. 644. Okay. Not even one man is able to come toward me. Yes. If the Father who sent me, capitalized, who sent me, capitalized Jesus, just for emphasis. Now, if the Father who sent me might not draw him, might not draw him, and it says, and I myself, very emphatic, Jesus speaking very emphatically, make sure I'm not, yes, and I myself will, now this idea of resurrect is literally, in KOINE common language, think about this, will stand, notice that, stand, excuse me, stand him up. These words are literally in there. Stand up, stand him up in the last day. Okay, now this is the text that the article, either the writer of the article was quoting someone or he himself was saying it, and I'm not even concerned about evaluating the article as much as the phrase splendidly illogical. Okay, so Jesus is talking, not even one man is able to come toward me if the Father who sent me might not draw him, and I myself will stand him up in the last day. Okay, so if the purpose of this sentence, this verse, is governed by the purpose in order that someone might believe. So there's our purpose. So let's just say we don't even break the text apart. We don't do anything about it. It's so that a person might believe. Well, how then is this so stressful to say then it's splendidly illogical to say that no man comes unless the Father who sent him draws, and then to say, well, everyone that the Father gives him comes to Jesus, and we just keep walking in a circle and we say it's splendidly illogical. Well, we haven't even moved forward yet to the explanation, but just knowing that the purpose of it. So preach this, and from a King James Version, the 1796, which everyone seems to use, an Oxford or a Cambridge edition. People are even arguing about that. Wonderful. But preach this. And yet the purpose of it will be in order that someone might believe. It doesn't say in order that just a certain few called the elect might believe, a certain few that are, of course, the interpretations here I'm quoting are totally foreign to the KOINE text, in order that a person predestined to believe might believe, in order that a person who, and just go down the list. This just simply says, in order that you might believe. So this lesson is first, so if you didn't know anything about language, you say, I could never translate from the KOINE common, and I don't agree with this English word, the way you've worded it out in this lesson on KOINE, it doesn't matter. Take your English text, the purpose is the same. Stress out, call it splendidly illogical, whatever you want to say, the purpose still is achieved when it's preached. Now, people who don't participate and decide they don't want to believe, we're unbelieving, and this is just more that they disbelieve. But let's hold this for a moment. So, not even one man is able to come toward me if the Father who sent me might not draw him. So, let's see how illogical it really is. Because as a KOINE Christian who knows that the purpose of the Gospel of John, the original purpose, which is the eternal purpose of it, the original and the eternal. It doesn't change. The eternal purpose. Eternal purpose is for that someone might believe, and that's Jesus is the Christ. Okay. So now let's move to 645, and let's see what it has to say. Now we say Jesus is still speaking. He says that indeed all will be taught. Now this word here really, let me go ahead and redo that. Discipled will be discipled ones, but it doesn't have to be like that. And you say all ones, all will be discipled, and it's of God. And if you can just forgive me a little more, since it's so splendidly illogical, I'm just going to discipled from God. He's the one from whom this was done. And then it says, and this is what's been written and remains on record. You say it's been written and remains on record. Okay. Indeed, all will be discipled from God, has been written and remains on record or scripted. It says everyone who listens alongside. Now this is just common words. Who listens alongside from, again you can see why the word from is here, because it's here now. Alongside from the Father. And then he explains that is the one who learns. So we have listens, now we have learns, and of course that's from the Father, is coming toward me. And this is Jesus talking. So he said this is what's been written and remains on record. So let's look at the splendid illogic of it. First says all will be discipled, and he says they're discipled from God, everyone who listens alongside from the Father, and that is who learns from the Father, is coming toward me. Now this, he says, has been written, remains on record in the prophets. So since this is not an alternative, this is not a first or second alternative of Calvinism or Arminianism, this is the original, which other people have chosen to remove one step, 1 degree away from, or more, 1 or more degrees removed from this in that realm called alternatives. This is our Gospel of John. This is our Lord talking, and we're giving heed to alternatives that would cause us to adjudge the text 645 and 644 of the Gospel of John, whose purpose was in order that people might believe. That's the original purpose, that's the eternal purpose, and these things were formatted, arranged, literally prepared by the master teacher, and the Father promised to inspire, bring back to all of his students so they could compose these lessons for us today and throughout all the ages we've had them. So if the previous text, now that we have this, you have your video, you can rewind or whatever you want to do, but let's just see what it says then. If he says that not even one, that's in verse 44, not even one is able, there we go, and it says unless the Father draws him. Now what does draw equal here then? I mean, this is a good question. What's draw? So someone says, well, let's look that up, and they say, well, it means drag. Okay, It's still, but in the context, what does this mean? In 6:44, Jesus has said, not even one man is able to come toward me unless the Father who sent me draw him. So what does draw look like? Well, it says in 6:45, let's see if we can see what 6:45 says. It says there's prophets, and those are the ones the Father sent, by the way. The Father sent prophets, and they spoke the gospel, and that was the gospel of the Lamb to come, the Lamb to come. So we have prophets who were sent, the Father sent them, and they spoke of the gospel, which was about the coming Jesus coming. So we have the prophets, and we have the gospel. Let's move a little arrow. So we have the gospel, and of course that points to the cross, and of course that's from about the Lamb. And then it says everyone who listens to what? That would be to the gospel, preached by the prophets who were sent by the Father. So we have the Father, and he sends the prophets, and they preach the gospel. And it says the audience, those in the audience who listen to the gospel, and it says that is, what we mean by listening is learns. It literally says that it says these people who listened and learned, the ones who listened and learned the gospel, that is, listened to the gospel that was preached by the prophets who were sent by the Father. It says these are the people, it says everyone, individually speaking, is coming, or they are, from our conversation here, are coming, is coming toward me. Toward me. So in this text, logically, very clearly and very commonly expressed, there's no draw. As the modern speakers today, you hear public speakers today and motivational speakers, even creationists and people who banter with evolution, they say, let's unpack this. It's a new way of saying let's elucidate or explain, but let's unpack this. Well, then draw equals the Father sent the prophets. And at the time Jesus is speaking, that's now the prophets, the writings of the prophets. It says that they preached, just like in Luke 16, where it says, let them hear Moses and the prophets, and referring to the rich man who lifted up his eyes being in torment, and he wanted someone, Lazarus, to go back to warn his brothers to not come to that place of torment. And Abraham tells them that they have, that is, the brothers have Moses and the prophets. So there's the word of God. The prophets, they preach the gospel. And so the gospel's being preached, the prophets are sent, the gospel's preached, and it says those who listen, that is, listen, that is, learns. It says they are coming, or everyone is, speaking singular, plural, is coming toward me. So there's nothing splendidly illogical. It's Lamb-centered, it's Christ-centered, it's Messianic-centered. Jesus said, 6:44, that not even one man is able. Well, there is no ability without the Father's drawing. There is no definition of draw here apart from the context that would say, well, what is this drag? What is this pull? What is this force? What is this involvement of the Father? Well, it's the proclamation of the gospel by the prophets that he sent, and it's the active listen, active learn, the consequence of listen, and the consequence, excuse me, this is punctular, by the way, the simplest form of action, just like the purpose of the gospel. You might believe, the simplest form, and then believe. You're born again, then you're believing, ing continuously. Notice this. So what's illogical about it? What makes this so difficult when you're so programmed and primed, literally, you're primed according to those alternatives, then everything we hear is charged by whatever disposition we hold. If we have a positive disposition toward Calvinism, then the stress and whatever we have in these texts that we impose as a Calvinist, we just say, well, we can stomach it. And then as an Arminian, if you're charged, you try to say, well, it doesn't mean this, it doesn't mean that. Well, what does it just what does it say? So really, I don't know. I guess people argue about Calvinism and Arminianism. What I've observed, and unfortunately have had to endure, is they really don't evaluate the text. They just talk. And in talking, they avoid the text entirely, and they can make it as difficult as they want. And like I said, there's not a third alternative has emerged. It's called Molinism, and this was written in 1992. I think yes, 1992 in Christianity Today, and it kind of built an anticipation of maybe a third alternative would come. Well, we as common Christians aren't waiting for another Messiah. We're not waiting for another message. We're not waiting for another alternative. We're not waiting for someone to come together and come up with a third alternative to somehow bridge the gap between Arminianism and Calvinism. The only gap or gulf that common Christians are concerned about is between God and man. And we learned this when we were children. This is the gap, not Arminianism and Calvinism, and then we come up with a third and we say, well, maybe we can use Molinism to bring these two alternatives together, or it can become our third alternative. More alternatives, let's say, I don't know which one was first, but whatever. I don't know if it's better to be the first alternative or the second alternative. I suppose if you are runner-up, you're the first runner-up and the second runner-up. So Calvinism is maybe, if it's the best, it's the first runner-up, and Arminianism, if it's not as good as Calvin, it's the second runner-up, and then Molinism now may be competing to be the first runner-up. Whatever that is, it has nothing to do with the original. And John 6:44 and 6:45, the words of Christ our Lord are very common, well expressed. The KOINE text, the original text with the eternal meanings and the purpose governing that lesson is in order that a person might believe, states clearly that the ability to come toward Jesus is a result of the Father drawing. The Father drawing is a process that involved the sending of the prophets, which were now in writing, the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, the Gospel that pointed to a coming Messiah and Lamb, and then those who learned from those prophets, that is listened, that is learned, that they were the ones coming. So it's very logical, it's very common, and it's very well written and very well stated. And I don't believe Jesus, the master teacher, could have said it better. No one can suggest to a common Christian that our master teacher, Jesus the Christ, the one who died for us, could have said it better. We can't conceive him having the need to say it better, and nor do we judge the Scriptures and his words as splendidly illogical. Illogical is the negation of logic, and he is the eternal logic, the eternal logos. So regrettably, skewing the data and marring the teachings of Jesus with alternatives, and then hoping and setting the stage, which apparently has happened. Apparently that's a precursor to the stage of hoping someone will engage and develop a third alternative, which Molinism is taking that spot. But Molinism isn't the message. Calvinism isn't the message, and neither is Arminianism. So they are correct in this article. It is correct. This writer, he is absolutely correct that these are alternatives. And how do you say it? He even says we may lose sight of the grand truths we hold in common. Well, we may, ironically, use the word common. KOINE is common. You see how obvious the truth is? We can miss what's already common, which was the original. We all have the original. And so if we all went by the original, adhered to the original meanings, the kind of action according to the KOINE language, which is a static language, it's very well written, it's very sufficient, then we wouldn't need to have the conversation in the first place. So if you say, well, I'm a Calvinist and I don't agree with KOINE, I don't know of a Calvinist that would say that. You say, I'm an Arminian, I don't agree with KOINE because it's the KOINE New Testament, and I don't affirm anything except the KOINE. So if someone says, well, you can't know KOINE, well, then you're talking to a person who's an agnostic and has an invested interest in being unable to know this, because if they know this, it will disclose what they have promoted, which is to move forward, to advance, to propagate. It will expose it for something less than that which is the original. So we don't need a third alternative. Multiple alternatives do not do for us what the original always has. And our book, if you just the Textus Receptus Greek text, as small as it is, and then the Nestle Lalande and the majority text and whatever all's out. I mean, these little, they're just such a small, compressed, compact amount of information that our energy should be here. But that's enough. I just had never heard of anyone describe that lesson of Jesus as splendidly illogical. It just happened recently, so I'm not been around the computer that long. It was actually 3 years ago this month. My sons gave me the kind you can carry around, a laptop computer. Of course, I keep mine on my desktop, so maybe it's a desktop that can be used in a laptop. I'm sure that's a big argument in someone's little world. But anyway, KOINE is not an alternative. It is the original, and KOINE Christians have always been here and will always be here. There will not be an alternative, although there are alternative kinds of Christians. And this article now knows that from the time that article was written till today, I'm only constructing an idea that Calvinism, Arminianism, and now they're now leading up to anticipating the reception of Molinism or Molinism. So, anyway, if you prefer, which all Christians do, the KOINE New Testament, the one God gave us, then, and I don't mean the Textus Receptus as opposed to other Greek New Testament in that sense. I'm referring to the KOINE text itself. And if you prefer that, as all of us do, we all have in our flesh the preference for things. Otherwise, I love hearing, I'd listen to, what's it called, the Alpha and Omega website. Dr. James White, he's probably the most brilliant Bible scholar I've ever heard. Now, I don't prefer what he says when it's not the KOINE, which is, that's not his fault. It's just, I'll always accept KOINE over that. It's like my calculator. I'll accept what it says over the student in class that's not doing so well. But that's he's a scholar. Then I love listening to Reasonable Faith, Dr. William Lane Craig. And you say, well, he teaches Molinism, I know, and Dr. James White teaches Calvinism. And you're like, well, what are you doing? They're not a contradiction. They're just alternatives. And the Molinism is the third alternative. But I would prefer listening to brilliant people and helping me learn, because I grow in my knowledge of KOINE the more I study KOINE. And when I hear people trying to advance, let's say, the first alternative, Alpha and Omega Ministry affirms Calvinism, reasonable faith promotes the third alternative, which is Molinism. I'll just write Molina and John Calvin. And then, of course, the third or the second runner-up, Arminianism. And, whoever, there's all kinds of sites out there that promote that in various forms. But these are probably the best two as far as having the privilege of engaging in critical thought and thinking. Word pictures, there's a Mark Keeler out there. He's really good. But you say, well, why would you listen to people that aren't Koine? Well, they may not have finished thinking all of that out. They may not. I was fortunate enough to attend a seminary in Southwest Little Rock, the oldest Bible school in the state of Arkansas. And we had people that told us to search the scriptures. They didn't say search Calvinism. They didn't say search Arminianism. They didn't say read a lot of commentaries. They didn't say go out and find trends and stay ahead of them, although I know a lot of missionary Baptists do that. But the Missionary Baptist Seminary that is still the finest as far as pointing you to the text teaches KOINE, the KOINE New Testament as it was originally provided us, and we were never given alternatives, nor were we invited to participate. I'm laughing on because some of my teachers, I really am grateful that they were strict as far as keeping me focused, or I would have been longing for a third alternative, wishing to abandon the two because of the tension between. But the tension between Calvinism and Arminianism was never problematic for my professors. They were masters of the KOINE text and adhered to it, so I never really ran into the aggravation that people seem to have and now generate an appetite for Molinism, which you really wouldn't have that appetite even for Calvinism or Arminianism. You'll find KOINE very sufficient. And that's enough.